Welcome to everyone joining us. This is Chris Posey with the Atlanta Urban Debate League. I'm going to jump right in and get started. We will be continuing a larger discussion on debate fundamentals with a section on clash. More fundamentals presentations and other topics will be available on our website at atlantadebate.org and soon via our Atlanta Debate YouTube channel. Before we take a look at some specific topics of discussion for clash, we will quickly address the importance of clash in debate and why it's considered fundamental to success. One definition of clash reads, to be incompatible or at odds. This definition fits well with the idea of clash in debate as well, which can be defined more simply as where two debate arguments are proposed in direct odds with each other. Clashing arguments often are described as, by opposing sides to create a forced choice for the judge due to incompatibility. Opposing sides can attempt to make a choice seem more obvious for a judge by comparing the size or likelihood of their argument versus their opponents. Without clash, it would be difficult to have a very wide or deep conversation regarding the annual topic or any topic really. Effective clash enables both sides and the judge to consider not just several different arguments, but several levels of argument for each particular argument. They say that you can't compare apples and oranges, but don't tell that to a debater. They may be able to compare the nutritional value or other values with time or preparation and research, making you question that long-used idiom. Most effective rebuttals will present to the judge the opportunity cost or benefits of each argument or the ballot itself. As debaters push how wide and deep issues are considered, it's likely that the value of competition and education can only increase, and so we want to try and facilitate clash as much as possible. So, how do you disagree? In the AUDL, we like to use an acronym to remember several different ways to clash with, or more simply disagree with, an opponent's argument. We break these ways down into 4 different categories, include deny, reverse, minimize, and outweigh. When denying an argument, we are challenging the basic assumption of an opposing argument. If an opponent is arguing that the sky is blue, we would deny that argument by saying that the sky is not blue. If an opponent argues that an increase in deficit spending increases the likelihood of an economic downturn, we could deny that argument by saying that deficit spending does not increase the likelihood of economic downturn. What sort of warrants can back up your decision to deny an argument? One option is to question the validity or present opposing data that questions the warrant of your opposition's argument. If the argument again is the example that deficit spending causes economic recession, and the warrant is evidence from the Heritage Foundation that deficit spending has a negative impact on investors' confidence due to decreasing confidence in the government being able to balance the budget successfully, we could deny this by pointing out the opposition's data regarding investor confidence is likely skewed for a host of alternate reasons. If it has been a long time since evidence has been published, it's possible, if not likely, depending on the topic, that conclusions the evidence is making are no longer accurate. Pointing out outdated assumptions that are made by opposing teams' evidence and being able to provide contrary concluding evidence with a more contemporary timestamp can be ways to deny opponents' arguments as well. There are of course, ranges of professional ability and competence in most, if not every field. It's possible to deny or trump the reasoning and evidence of an opposing argument with your own more qualified source on that subject. Another way to clash with an argument is to reverse or turn it. For example, if your opponent makes the argument that self-driving cars increase safety, you could reverse this argument if you were able to prove that self-driving cars actually decrease safety. Reversing or turning an opponent's argument can serve as offense against a ballot for the opposing side and become reasons why the judge should vote for you. If the affirmative's advantage is increasing vehicle safety and you're able to effectively prove that their plan has the opposite effect, then you've turned the original reason why the judge was asked to vote for the affirmative into a reason to vote against them. So there are two main types of turns that you can make. Saying that the affirmative plan has the opposite effect as intended on vehicle safety is an example of making a link turn. If you're taking the argument that links the action of the plan with the impact of vehicle safety and flipping it back on the opposition. Another specific example of a reverse or turn is an impact turn. Let's say that the affirmative makes a couple arguments. First, that the plan decreases the overall impact of global warming on our planet. Second, that an uncontrolled timeline of global warming will cause extinction. If you wanted to impact turn or reverse this argument, you would want to argue that global warming is in fact good for life and our planet. One thing to be conscious of for sure when making reverse or turn arguments is the possibility of double turning yourself. A double turn occurs when one side turns two parts of an argument with the unintended effect of creating a new or stronger reasons to vote for their opposition. An example could be if you argued both that the affirmative plan makes global warming more likely, while also making an argument that says global warming is good. Now all you've proven is that the affirmative increases global warming, which is in turn a good thing. By quickly reviewing your arguments before your speeches and avoiding both link and impact turning, you can minimize the likelihood of ever making this mistake. One effective way to respond to an opposing argument and increase the likelihood of winning your own arguments is to make arguments that minimize the impact of your opposition's arguments. What I mean by this is, if they say that an economic collapse in China will cause a global economic collapse, you could minimize this by arguing that an economic collapse in China would be limited at most to a regional economic collapse. If your opponent argues that their plan stops conflicts that would result in the death of millions, you could argue that conflicts would actually just limit casualties to maybe a significantly lower number and not the numbers that the opposition was talking about. These arguments serve primarily as defense against reasons for the judge to vote for your opposition. They are what can be considered defensive arguments as opposed to, for example, reverse arguments, which are generally considered offensive arguments. When considered in the larger debate, minimizing arguments have the effect of making your reasons to vote for your side or your offensive arguments appear relatively stronger. There are a few main ways to minimize your opponent's arguments. You can make arguments that call into question the likelihood of your opponent's impacts, reducing their overall probability. Other arguments could seek to prove, a much smaller magnitude or overall effect of your opponent's arguments, i.e. the amount of people that are affected or the amount of money, just the size. Additional arguments can also prove that there's an increased time frame to your opponent's arguments, and that would, of course, help a judge consider your arguments if they're operating on a much sooner time frame. Outweighing arguments, in order to shape a judge's decision to your team's favor, it's always going to be important to put the impacts of your arguments in the context of the impacts of your opposition. The purpose of outweighing arguments is similar to the purpose of minimizing arguments in that you're seeking to increase the net size of your impacts in relation to your opponent's impacts. Any arguments that prove the magnitude or size of your impacts is larger, or that there's a strong likelihood of them occurring, can help prove that your arguments outweigh those of your opponents. An example of this might be a debate in which the affirmative would want to argue that the amount of people affected by a Chinese economic downturn is far greater than those that would be affected by a Japanese economic downturn, or that the likelihood of a U.S. economic policy influencing a Japanese bank policy is much greater than that same policy influencing how China values its currency. In addition to magnitude and probability arguments, you can always argue that the time frame under which your impacts occur is much shorter and therefore, necessitates much more prompt action. At the end of the round, everything that you do or say is really about the judge. And so it's very likely that your judge is going to choose to take notes and flow your debate. They're going to look for you to clash directly with your opposition's arguments and make comparisons regarding the weight of your arguments, versus theirs. Judges want you to make the decision easy for them. So don't be shy. Nobody wins when a judge has to default to personal preference or presumption or random chance due to teams forgetting comparisons that would inform them, and allow them to make a calculated decision. Oftentimes, debaters in debates will use letters and numbers to organize their responses. My first argument, my second argument, A subpoint, B subpoint, for example. You want to stick to these practices and stay consistent in the debate to facilitate a better amount and a greater amount, of clash. It's much easier to make specific and detailed responses if everyone is following along with their flow, and these numbers and letters and ordinal structure help for sure. As an alternative, you can always directly reference the subject or the author of a particular argument, referencing the uniqueness debate or the Christopher evidence. These are ways that you can keep the debate organized and make sure the judge is following your thought process. Oftentimes, one side will make multiple responses to a single argument. So one team makes an argument, the opposing team makes 3 responses to that one argument. It's crucial that you leave room in between arguments on your flow to account for this. Try to use separate sheets of paper also, or worksheets if you're doing it digitally, to separate different off-case arguments and off-case parts like advantages or solvency. A lot more information regarding effective flowing can be found on our website at atlantadebate.org, as well as in other videos such as this one. I want to thank you for joining us and wish you the best of luck. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. You can email me, chris@atlantadebate.org, or find more resources like this on our YouTube channel at Atlanta Debate.